Welcome to the podcast. It starts with you, with me, Vic O'Farrell. I ask my guests, by understanding their own behaviours and personality style, what impact on their lives, both personally and professionally, has there been? What is it like to live and work with someone of your style? I mean, this is not about labelling people, putting people in boxes, or an excuse for bad behaviour. It's about recognising, understanding and respecting that we're all different. And what impact can you have on others by looking in the mirror? Because it starts with you. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of It Starts With You. And today I am delighted and excited actually, because I know that I'm going to learn a lot by talking to the wonderful Jane Gunn. Jane, hello. How are you?
Hello, Vic. Very well. And thank you so much. I'm also excited.
Oh, good. Rather than me try to explain what it is that you do, would you like to tell
Yeah.
the viewers and the listeners what it is that you do and help people with, but also in terms of your own personality, what you would say your preferences are, your style is?
Perfect. Okay. So I'm known as the Barefoot Mediator. I'm a lawyer by training. I now am a mediator, commercial mediator, professional mediator, and I really help people with managing conflict, resolving conflict, and understanding why it's magic. That's my thing, the magic of conflict. Personality style, I think we've just talked about that. I would seem to be, in your estimation, perhaps a sort of more people-focused yellow person on your disc profile. I do love colours and I do love people. I love flowers as well.
Um, so I know I'm going to learn a lot from this half an hour conversation because what I love is the fact that you talk about understanding the magic of conflict. So would you like to just expand a little bit more on what that means?
Definitely. So, most of us, all of us, me included, you included, we don't really like conflict. We shy away from it. We have this negative view of it. We think of it as fighting, and very often it is fighting and adversarial. The reason it's magic, and I talk about is that the magic of conflict is you have to imagine that conflict is a little bit like water in the environment. If it doesn't rain, our gardens are arid and dry and nothing grows. If we have too much rain, which is like too much conflict, then everything becomes bogged down and still nothing grows. So we have to know it's going to rain. It's inevitable that in any friendship, any relationship, any organization, there's going to be conflict, which is really the behaviors that result from people being unhappy with each other in any way. And so we've got to know that we've got to identify that conflict. Oh, look up in the rain. Oh, there's a black cloud. It's about to rain. Need to put my umbrella up, you see. Or and so what we do in our gardens and so on is that we channel water. We expect it, we catch it, and we channel it. And that's what we need to do with conflict. We need to go, I know it's going to rain. I know sometimes it's going to be a flood, there's going to be a deluge. Other times it's going to be too dry. But so we need to be able to channel that conflict and say, it's a good thing. Nothing's going to grow if we don't acknowledge that people are sometimes unhappy with things and we need to know why.
So, picking up on what you just said there about the rain and the fact you look up and you go, oh, look, there's a black cloud. I need to get my brolly.
Yeah.
So, can we identify when conflict is going to happen, be it in the work environment, in our home environment? Should we able to recognize black clouds?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, most of us have a sense if we're in an organization where things don't feel right or we don't feel a relationship with someone else is going right. And what we tend to do is the first thing we do. I talk about how conflict escalates like an escalator in a department store. The first thing we do is we have a conversation in our head with ourselves and we think, I'm not very happy with this person or this situation. Then we probably go to a colleague in the organization and have a good old chat in the kitchen, or we take it home and chat to our partner. The one person we don't talk to is the person we've got the conflict with, the challenge with, because we're worried that if we do that, we're going to trigger some negative outcome. And so it's much easier to go and. So what I see is that things escalate, they get worse, and they're not addressed. So that can take weeks, months, or even years.
Okay. And I know when it happens.
Mm,
I can definitely see it just because, to be fair, this week, so we're recording this at the end of January. My husband
mm,
is at home with the rest of the team. He's a builder, and
mm.
he's probably going to listen to this now. And I think we had conflict both Monday morning and Tuesday morning because when they're working at the house, or they're outside working on an
Mm,
annex,
mm.
I know, and I don't know, and even when as the Queen of Behaviours, I know my heckles are up, and I know that I've gone from being very yellow to being very red,
Mm,
and
yeah.
I have to make sure that I change so that I'm still very yellow. Because if I
Mm,
go out there being very red, they'll see a different person and then they'll be like,
mm.
oh, and they don't want to say, is everything okay? What they do is they wait for me to come in. And I know they're all out there going, me, 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 me.
Yes, they did. That's it. That's it. That's exactly it. And
And why?
so,
So
mm.
why are we so scared about having that conversation with the person that we feel we've got potential conflict with?
Lots of reasons these days. I mean, the initial reluctance is because we're afraid that person will, it'll blow up into something we can't handle. We'll have to handle very emotional behavior or an outburst. We're sort of afraid of that we don't know how to handle our own reaction or the other person, or a combination of those two. So a blow up. Um, Today, in particular, we're all worried about being politically correct. Are we going to say something in an organization in particular that is going to have negative consequences for us? So there's this treading on eggshells all the time. Am I going to upset someone or upset some value that's upheld by this organization about political correctness and other things? So we're worried about tricky topics, shall we say. That also plays into it, I think. And then sometimes we just like an easy life, don't we? And we are the eternal optimist, thinking maybe it'll be better by tomorrow, or maybe if I bury my head in the sand, this will go away. And it very rarely does, but it can seem easier when you're busy not to tackle something.
Hmm. So,
Mm.
um, if we talk about the political correctness, because I often worry, even when I'm delivering a workshop, especially if I'm with a new client, I'll be like, oh, I better make sure. And I feel that I'm pretty well surrounded, being as part as both of us are. For those that are listening, the Professional Speaking Association is how Jane and I met. And so
Mm.
I feel like I've come and I'm with lots of people who educate me and I learn from, but sometimes it's just an opinion and it's not fact, is it? So that when you say something that is wrong, I would want some. So if I said something that perhaps wasn't the correct way of saying, say if I addressed somebody as a she or her and they wanted to be addressed as a they or them, but I
Mm.
wasn't aware of that,
Mm.
I wouldn't like that to cause conflict. I would like to just be corrected so that I then can change my behaviors and the words that I use. But would you say that people just aren't doing that then? Not on that
Yeah,
particular.
I mean, I do have an example of that in a workplace of somebody who felt racially triggered, if you like, by a comment a colleague had made. So instead of actually tackling that and say, I didn't like it when you said that, would you not say it again? They kind of store it up in a little black book. And then when they've got enough little black book comments, they maybe escalate it to HR and say, I've got a grievance or complaint against this person. Here's a list of the times that they've done X, Y, and Z. And then the person will say, I never knew, she never said, or
Mm.
he never said. And so it is that challenge of not being able to let the other person know and or accept. So in law, for example, we have a difference between what we call the actus rea and the mens rea. So the act of doing something and then the intention. And what you have to say there is, did I intend to offend someone? I may have committed the act, but was my intention to offend? If my intention wasn't to offend, would it not be possible for me to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to, I didn't even know that, that was going to be offensive. Would you accept my apology? And can we start with a clean sheet? And can I learn from that? And that isn't always possible, which is a shame.
And yeah, I suppose if you're saying people are storing up things in their, little black book, then perhaps actually that isn't going to then be resolved with a sorry. Perhaps
Mm.
the first comment, if somebody said something that offended me, then or triggered me. It's not so much about the offence, because me being offended quite often is my reaction to what you've said as opposed to
Yeah.
what you've said. But actually, if you're triggering something in me, I do need to be able to turn around and say, Jane, do you mind? Do you mind not? I mean, I was bullied badly at school. Because
Mm.
I've got, as you can see, if you're watching this and if you are of visual impairment, I have very dark hair. And so at school, I had a very dark haired lip. I didn't know.
Right.
So I was bullied for having a moustache at school. I actually
Mm.
went to an all-girls school. They were horrible. Um,
Yes. So
they,
did I.
they were. And so
Yeah.
thing is, I think because I was bullied at school and I just dealt with it at school, if anyone ever said anything to me now, that triggers childhood bullying for me,
Mhm.
and I
Absolutely.
and I can react really badly if someone says anything
Mm.
to me. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you know me and say and think you'll just try it on me next time you see me, don't be
Don't.
surprised if it's like a slap. But that's
Yeah.
how much it will trigger me. It will triggers me
Yes.
so much that I get really
Yeah.
angry with it.
You see, I wouldn't know that. That's
No.
the point. I wouldn't know that. I wouldn't know that something might trigger you more than it might trigger someone else. So I would not know, and therefore it would not be anywhere near my intention to do that. Now, there are certain things that might trigger anybody, but there are certain things that might be specific to you or to anybody else because of the background, as you've just described, that could just, be a match to a, a match to a
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So but is that also something that I, as the person who gets triggered by it, should also work on so that
absolutely. Yeah. I
I
mean, we
don't.
can't all be treading on eggshells all the time. And I think we have entered this space where perhaps we are, I'm not saying we're being too easily triggered, but, I think, yes, we can't be always treading on eggshells all the time. So I think it is a joint responsibility for all of us to sort of, we've got to understand, how do we live and work together? How do we rub along together? Because in families and in workplaces, we end up with people we haven't necessarily chosen, have we? You know? Um, a- and this is why the work that you and I do is so fascinating, because we are thrown together, even in our families, with people that we haven't necessarily chosen, who see the world differently to us, who have different values and ways of dealing with things, different trigger points, different all sorts of things. And
Mm,
how do we deal with all that? How do we manage our behavior, their behavior?
yeah.
It's a challenge, isn't it?
It is a challenge because I think, in terms of personalities, I always say the external or the extrovert externally thinks. Their thought process is just to think
Yeah.
out loud, whereas the
Yeah.
introvert will internalize things and that. So where something is being triggered or there's conflict, the perhaps the external or the extrovert thinker may be more likely to say something there and then on the spot. Whereas
Hmm.
it might be the introverts that would take it away and think it through and actually kind of unpick it a little bit more and think, well, what do they mean by that?
So I have a couple of tips I can add in right now, Vic, about this. Is that if you are going to say something, I have two things. I took about the power of 10, which means being tentative. I think I heard you say this, or this is how this came across to me, rather than when you said that, it's just our approach to that. If our approach is rather aggressive and adversarial, the response we get back will also be the same. It will be defensive and also adversarial. Whereas if we can be more tentative, I think this, I'm wondering this, I'm curious whether you meant that, just a little bit softer, we're likely to get a softer response back. And the second tip is always give power back to the other person at the end. So you say your piece and you say, how did that feel for you? Or what was going on for you at that moment? You give it back rather than a hard stop and, you know, that's my position, putting my flagpole in the ground here, you know. So those two things might help people a little bit, the power of 10, being tentative, and then giving the power back to the other person at the end of the conversation.
That's very powerful and interesting because I suppose it's a maybe it's a bit like road rage. Is it so instant that
Yes.
I mean I'm very good that just as we come into our village here, there's a little mini roundabout, and it's basically it's more like a T junction, and the people who are going straight generally don't indicate. I always do. I always do because I like people to
What's
know
your
where I'm going.
indication for going straight then, Vic? I don't know
I
what it
turn
is.
so if I'm going straight over and the only way on that roundabout is left, I will indicate right. And
Right,
a
I
lot of
see.
people do so that they know I'm going straight up. And then I had
Okay.
this huge juggernaut. I was on the roundabout, and bear in mind it's only a mini roundabout. And I thought, right, my initial reaction on anything like that is, bib the horn, maybe some hand gesticulations. I won't share those. But actually, what I did was I bibbed the horn, and the driver just looked down at me, and I was just like, I'm only little. I was here first. And he turned around and he went, Oh, I'm sorry, love. And I
Hmm.
thought, oh, now if I'd have really bibbed that horn and
Yeah.
done the hand gesticulation,
Yeah. He'd have gone, "Bah."
yeah. And so,
Yep, yep, yep.
yeah, I try and think of whenever I'm coming to conflict, I always try and think of it road rage. If someone bibs at me and I'm in the wrong, I generally put a hand up and go, sorry.
And you know, road rage makes me think of social media as well, because in road rage, you're in your car, so people become dehumanized. You can't see the human being. You can see, I often give I often give this example, supposing I'm just driving like you were and somebody cuts across me and I shout and then I look into the car and go, oh my God, that's Mary from next door.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then all of a sudden, you which can easily happen when you live in a village like we do. Oh my God, I've actually just shouted and sworn at Mary from next door. But actually, but the reason that makes a difference is because I know Mary. And so suddenly I can humanize her and go, oh, that's the lovely Mary from next door. I should never have shouted at her because I see her as a human being. But when you can't see into cars, as you very much can't, and the same on social media, when you can't connect with someone because of the tin around them or because of the screen or because you can't even see them, they become dehumanized. And that's one of the other things that happens in conflict is we either dehumanize or even demonize people, and we make up all these negative stories and assumptions about them in our head. They must have meant that. They intended to do this. They're selfish, mean, and so on. That's the story we tell ourselves because we can't see and connect with them.
So quite often then, would you say conflict is happening subconsciously with people, even before people are verbally saying anything? People get, do I say offended? People are forming opinions just of someone's body language.
Oh yeah, well, so that's it. We form assumptions, inferences, and opinions the whole time. And one thing I talk about again, not an escalator this time, it's the ladder, a ladder of inference. But when you make an inference, I infer that your behavior meant something, or what you meant by it, or what you intended. We take it to what we call the highest level of inference. So I infer that the worst intention, the worst behavior. And so I get, Vic must have meant this, or she must have intended that at this highest level. When instead we should infer the lowest level of intention and think, actually, I'm sure you didn't mean that, and your intentions were good. And so that's again something we tend to do. And when you understand that and can stop and think about, was I making an inference there or an assumption about what you're into when I don't even know what it was?
Mm. And so, yeah, I suppose really then where conflict is it about taking a breath, a space,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
gap?
I wrote actually my blog yesterday, was it yesterday? About the power of silence.
Yeah.
Let silence do the heavy lifting because, sometimes we don't leave a gap. We don't leave enough space for us to just think, if somebody challenges us, we challenge back immediately. We don't stop and think. I can't remember now. There was a very powerful video posted on somebody's blog, which was, I think it may have been of Steve Jobs being asked a very awkward question in the middle of a presentation. And instead of just firing off, he sits there for quite some time and just thinks and thinks. And then he says, "That was a very good question. Here's my answer." Rather than firing back and saying, "No, you're wrong," or "I'm defending myself," or "I'm defending my company." And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's very, very powerful thing to do for yourself, but also for the other person.
Mm. And what would you say would be a powerful length of silence? So, say if somebody
Oh, well, that's an interesting thing.
said,
Yes, it also depends on the gesture that goes with the silence, because if the silence is accompanied by rolling eyes and crossed arms, that could.
yeah,
So there's all sorts of connotations there. Yeah, I mean, it obviously if it's long, or long silences become awkward, don't they?
yeah,
So it's enough silence for you to calm your emotions, gather your thoughts, but not enough silence for it to be awkward.
yes. Otherwise, the other person might rephrase, reframe, and re-vomit what they just said at you.
Or they might just walk out. You never know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um,
Yeah.
so what's your best advice then if you've got conflict situation, be it at work or at home, and
Mm,
you're listening to someone's listening to this thinking, I really have got this conflict situation and I need to address it. What would you say
mm.
was like the first step to addressing it?
So I take people through a four-step process, and the first thing is to say what's going on now and why does it matter? So and also what's the narrative? What is the story I'm telling myself? And if there's another person involved, what is the story they may be telling themselves that's different from mine? So what's the now? Why is this potentially a problem? What's the narrative? And then why do I perceive that as negative? That's the first step to take.
Hmm.
And so in a mediation where I might be helping clients, we have to get the issues out. What are the issues? What are the current issues? What are the things we need to talk about to move beyond this?
And do you find sometimes when you unpack those issues that if you've got two people on either side, that the person here has unpacked a load of issues that this person hadn't even thought of, and these issues are completely different, and that
Yeah.
they sit there going, "Oh, didn't even know that was an issue."
Yeah, particularly in the work I do, because I'm often mediating legal disputes. And so people have come with their legal arguments. But in fact, when it comes to exploring the issues, there may be all sorts of things, as you say, that they haven't yet articulated and said, but actually it's about this, because those are more personal things. Whereas once you've gone to a lawyer and they've written out your legal pleadings, those are more formal things.
Right. So really,
So
people should just get you in at the start so that they don't have to get the lawyers. Should we just get Jane? Let's get Jane in and have
they
a
should. No,
yes.
no, I mean, to be serious, they should, because this has been my passion since the beginning of starting this work nearly 30 years ago, is to talk about early conflict resolution. I think, catch it early, resolve it simply, because the longer you leave it, the more complex it becomes, and the more you get embroiled in formal processes like grievance, HR processes, or litigation.
And is that because, like you say, people have written one thing, two things, three, all these things down, and suddenly they've gone from a little elastic band ball to this massive thing, and it's really hard to untie it. And now it's so big that when I throw it, it's going to make some
Yeah,
damage.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh. I could carry on talking to you, but what I'd like to do is for us to put in the show notes. So have you got something that you can ask people to download when it comes to the four steps, to help them understand and to get in contact with you, basically?
To get in contact with me, yes, I've got various sort of worksheets and things I can send people depending on. I'm just working on doing some what I call situation sacks so that people can come to me and say, it's this kind of situation. And I can say, well, here's the very thing that you need just for that. Because, conflicts are so varied. It may be this is something with my teenager. It may be this is something with my boss in the workplace. I deal quite a lot with boardroom and partnership disputes. So, yeah, I haven't got something that's generic for everybody. I do have quite a lot of little videos and things, and I could certainly send you a link if you'd like it, Victor, some videos if people would like to watch those.
Yeah, if
For
they're publicly
managing,
available, we can put that in the show notes. Because what you just
yeah,
said then, I suppose, yes, dealing with conflict with a teenager is probably very different than dealing it with a co-director.
yes. I mean, the principles are the same, but the challenge is different. I've now got little grandchildren in my life, so I've gone back to that stage of how do you deal with 2 and 3 year olds.
Why? But
Yes.
why?
Why? Definitely why, and why not? And my little Isla will just put her hands on her hips and go, "No way!"
So I wrote a blog actually, which has just gone out this week, is about what behaviours are we teaching to Gen Alpha? Because and
Mm,
it was all over actually just watching me and my husband and how we've become, I would say, not addicted, because that is a strong word, but habitually attached to our phones. And
yeah.
I think when you're sitting, we happened to be at Euston Station. And so I was
Mm,
just watching the train, watching it. I thought, okay, 10 minutes. Hopefully that'll come up. So I literally picked my phone. I thought, there are small children in Euston Station watching all the adults, thinking that is normal. A bit like when I was that age and I saw all the adults smoking. And I
yes.
thought that was normal. So I
Yeah.
started that habit myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's some interesting, I'm really exploring some interesting work, going back to looking at how children form their thoughts and views, and in particular, how they form connections. There's a very interesting book I'm just exploring about uh, what are we talking about how children, how they connect to adults and how they are influenced by them and versus being influenced by their peer group. So,
Interesting.
and many young people are more influenced by their peer group than they are by wise adults. And so that means that, yeah, that's a very interesting thing to explore, actually.
Are they still saying though that it's that first 7 years where we form our opinions and or is that reduced now? Because obviously everyone's
Well, yeah, I think that almost has reduced because, if there isn't that attachment or connection with adults, which is happening less because people are juggling work and they're less available to their kids and pick them up, and then, not anybody's fault, but that's how things are. Then children revert to, their peer group.
Mm.
And so I think we are in danger of that. And it's kind of thinking, well, how do we balance that in the modern world um, with experiencing and being able to communicate and connect with adults as well, that we admire and respect their wisdom.
Yeah, interesting. And I think the thing we're so wrapped in that fast-paced world that we're not stopping, we're not breathing, are we? We're not silence.
Yeah.
Think.
Yes. I think so. And I think, teaching children to sort of read books and spend time thinking or being in silence. My grandchildren never watch the television when they come here. We don't watch the television, so they've never seen it on and they've never asked to have it on. And so that's a different way of modeling is to say, well, we don't watch the television here, so don't even ask.
Yeah, they probably don't even know you've got one. There's a
No,
thing.
they probably, even though it's sat there, they've never noticed it because they've never seen it on. So
Yeah.
that is another way that exactly you say that in the station, you know,
Yeah. They probably
people are
come around to grandma's
watching.
and think, that's a very boring picture. It's just black.
Well, we do all sorts of other things
Oh,
instead.
wonderful. Jane, it's been lovely having this conversation.
Yeah, lovely.
And yes, if you're listening, do go and check out the show notes because I shall make sure I've got YouTube links and all of that so that you can get hold of Jane. So, just to leave our viewers and listeners just with one piece of advice, what would you say?
Well, my thing is all about self-determination, that it's up to us, it's up to each of us to make our own decisions, and that we are responsible for us. That's the title of my newsletter today. It's up to us. No matter what else is going on in the external world, we are responsible, and it's up to us to make our own decisions and take responsibility for our behaviour.
Fabulous. A bit like the title of this podcast. It starts with you.
There you go.
Jane, that's wonderful, and I look forward to
Thank you.
speaking to you soon.
Thank you very much.
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What have you learnt? What will you do differently? Do leave a review on Apple or Spotify on It Starts With You podcast. And also leave a comment down below. Do also then connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. And why not even join the Facebook group It Starts With You and keep the learning ongoing. Thank you for listening.